All right, hello everyone. I'm Vincent Iolenti, a social scientist in the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Consent-Based Siting. Welcome to Successes in Siting, a DOE public roundtable. Today, we're going to hear about real-world experiences with siting or hosting different kinds of facilities, from wind to solar to nuclear to fossil energy and beyond. We have some really talented special guests on the line today. They represent communities, government, academia, and industry. Our goal is to collect perspectives to inform DOE and DOE's consent-based siting consortia as we work to site one or more federal consolidated interim storage facilities for spent nuclear fuel. Consent-based siting is a participatory approach to siting facilities. It focuses on the needs and concerns of people and communities. It's flexible, it's adaptive, it's collaborative, and it's responsive to public feedback. The consortia are composed of 12 project teams from nonprofits, academia, and the private sector that support DOE's consent-based siting efforts. They're spending 2 years actively engaging with communities to facilitate mutual learning and to build capacity. They're hosting listening sessions. They're issuing sub-grant opportunities. They're developing information resources. They're setting up community meetings and much, much more. They've been hard at work. After this process is complete, DOE will issue a national call for communities to volunteer as potential hosts for the facility or facility. Currently, we're broadcasting live from a 2-day DOE-hosted Consent-Based Siting Consortia Progress Update meeting in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we're really looking forward to hearing some of the perspectives from the 12 project teams that are with us in the room today, too. They have a lot to say on the issue of siting as well. So before I go any further, though, I want to take a moment to highlight a new interactive tool from DOE that relates to the issue of achieving success in siting very much. The Integrated Waste Management Story Maps provide easy-to-access information on DOE's approach to siting federal consolidated interim storage facilities. Well, what are story maps? Story maps are a cloud-based data presentation tool that all sorts of different US government agencies use. But the goal with our story map is to honor our commitment to inclusive public engagement and by providing equitable access to information about our efforts. The story map on consent-based siting for consolidated interim storage details DOE's concept for an integrated waste management system. It explores potential facility designs, potential operations, and it highlights potential benefits and impacts associated with hosting a facility like this. So Story Maps is free, and it's accessible using the QR code that's found on the screen. Or you can just go to our homepage at energy.gov/consent-based siting. So this is the 4th installment of our Consortia webinar series. The recording of our February session, which was a listening session called Sharing Perspectives, is now available on our website. That brought together guests representing 17 different nonprofits, professional societies, and other national, regional, and state groups. A big takeaway from that session was the importance of learning from history, drawing best practices from existing case studies of successes and failures in siting. So in response, we decided to theme this installment based on that feedback. So we'll be asking the consortia, as well as our invited guests in the virtual space, questions we frequently receive about what it takes and what it really means to successfully site a facility. This will widen our usual focus on spent nuclear fuel management and place it into a broader context. By doing so, we'll see what sorts of practices associated with siting are portable from other domains, such as renewable energy siting or fossil energy siting, into the nuclear space, and which ones are just specific to the nuclear issue. So now I'd like to extend a warm welcome to the invited participants joining us remotely from across the country and across the world. We invite each of you to raise your hands in response to whatever questions I ask today that resonate the most with you. And to do this, you have to use Zoom.gov's hand raise feature, which is found in the reactions bar at the bottom of your screen. When called upon, please unmute yourself on Zoom. Then please allow our comms team a few seconds so they can spotlight you on the screen and have you visible to us in the room as the consortium meets. We ask you to limit your response to under 3 minutes. And the reason for this is we want to maximize time for as many participants as possible to weigh in, to keep this interactive, to keep this conversational, and to keep the good ideas flowing. If you prefer not to weigh in at all, however, that's totally fine as well. This is a conversational webinar series, and listening and speaking are valued in equal measure. So if you just like to listen to the conversation, that's totally fair game. I also like to say welcome to the online public audience who's invited to reflect on these issues of siting alongside of us. If audience members have perspectives to share, we strongly encourage you to submit them via the Q&A box and zoom.gov. You can also send them to us via email. We've received some already, I believe. Our email address is consent-based-siting@hq.doe.gov, and consent-based siting at DOE will read and think about those very thoroughly and integrate them into our plans as we move forward. So I'd like to thank the following guests for confirming their participation in this event. Garrett Bean, Managing Director at Copia Power, who was involved with the Spotsylvania solar plant siting effort. Julia Bovey, Director for Offshore Wind at Eversource Energy. Mark Bollinger, Manager of DOE's Carlsbad Field Office in New Mexico. Rebecca Casper, the Mayor of Idaho Falls in Idaho. Rod Ewing, Co-Director of Stanford Center for International Security and Cooperation. John Heaton, a member of the Mayor's Waste Isolation Pilot Plant Task Force in Carlsbad, New Mexico. Christine King, Director of the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear. Dakota Kochi, Director of Government and External Relations at Canada's Nuclear Waste Management Organization. Brian Ross, Vice President of Renewable Energy at the Great Plains Institute. Nate Smith, CEO of TELUS Holdings in Australia, who has experience with proposals related to transnational nuclear waste management facility proposals. And last but not least, Cynthia Windland, Director of Community Revitalization at the Nuclear Decommissioning Collaborative. This is a very talented group, and they have countless lived experiences with hosting or siting facilities of various kinds. We'll do our best to hear from as many of them as possible today during our conversation. We hope that today will just serve as the start of a much larger conversation, and this is a conversation between DOE, the invited guests, the consortia, and the public at large about spent nuclear fuel management moving into the future towards an integrated waste management system. So with that in mind, let's get started. So I'm going to just open the floor with a really broad question. This is for anyone to answer. What are one or two of your top recommendations for achieving success with siting a facility? Let's start with Nate Smith from TELUS.
Morning, everybody, or afternoon in the States. I think it's 5 a.m. here in Australia, so apologies. I've only had one coffee. First off, just a quick thing on the introduction, just to give background. We have my team and myself. I think we're the first entity that has both sited, done the community engagement, designed, built, and operated a low-level radioactive waste facility in a Western democracy in the last 40 years. So behind us, we are now operating Australia's first and only geological repository that can take low-level radioactive waste. We also recently got approval from the Titjikala to an indigenous group and a community group to launch a second project in Australia that would take international low-level radioactive waste. This project here had community groups over a 12-year period approve the build of this, and it opened up about 18 months ago. Look, none of these processes are monolithic. And I think that's, the two things that I think we've learned, and, I've done all the engagement with my management team. I think number one is listen, listen more than talk. And I think that's hard because all of us are so excited and passionate about these projects and government and private industry. But the fact of the matter is that, my second point is, if you want to launch one of these with a community, this is all about creating a partnership and trust. And you can only create partnership and trust like any other relationship if you know what your community, what your partners want. And I think, I've watched a lot of these situations where you have big business or government, you come in and we're going to say, we're going to give you this and this and this. What does the community want? Do they want the jobs? Do they care about the story? Do they care about the royalties? And so, mine, and I know it seems pretty simplistic, right? But I think it's number one, create a partnership. And number two, listen more than talk.
Thank you very much, Nate. Now we'll hear from Dr. Rod Ewing from Stanford University. Rod?
Right.
Yeah. Here, just maybe give the comms team a second to put you up on the screen. Do we have them? Oh, this might be audio only. All right, Rod, take it away. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. And I want to say that first that I appreciate what the Department of Energy is trying to do, in the sense that it has constraints, very difficult constraints on developing facilities and repositories at the back end of the fuel cycle. And I see this as an effort to move forward in one of the narrow areas where actually progress might be possible. I'll echo what's just been said. I think that for a successful consent-based siting process, you need trust and power sharing. Of course, listening, as was just said, is quite important to this. But the trust and power sharing has to be handled, I think, in the proper way. And the first step in this process should be to have a new entity, a new implementer, a new organization responsible for nuclear waste management and disposal. And the reason I say this is that I don't think you can farm out, no matter how successful they are, trust to the efforts of a consortium. You want the public or the local community or the states to be involved, or the tribes, with an organization that will be there when things change. So as an example, you need to have continuity. And imagine that 20 years from now, the Department of Energy wants to change its mind about interim storage and make it indefinite storage. Well, that's a big change in policy. And so you would have to be sure that the implementer, in this case DOE, has accumulated the trust that was started with the consortium program. And then you need to design the power sharing. And by power sharing, I mean a very clear idea for the community and for the implementer to know when the community or tribe or state can say no. What are the rules? And you can't switch out at the last moment the consortium for DOE or go back and forth. This is a very important process, and you want, again, continuity. So I think the organizational structures that we adapt to pursue consent-based siting will be key to any future success. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. We also, before we go on, that's a wide range of very valuable and thought-provoking perspectives. Many of these are issues we talk about frequently on our consent-based siting team at the U.S. Department of Energy. I'd like to refer people interested in these issues to a document on our website. It's called the Consent-Based Siting Process Document, and it lays out DOE's plan across 3 successive stages moving forward into the future. Planning and capacity building being stage 1, which is what we're currently in, doing our efforts with the consortia, hitting the road, talking with communities, releasing informational resources, hosting all sorts of events to build trust and let people tell those stories they would like to tell. After that, site assessment and screening, and then later comes negotiation and eventually implementation. And there's all sorts of subphases within these that address several of the issues that you just brought up. And I hope you're involved with the conversation as we move forward along the lines of the consent-based siting process document. And I really appreciate your thoughtful and very nuanced insight into this. So next up, we have Christine King from GAIN. Christine, are you here? Can we get you up here?
Hi, Vincent, I'm here. So I think I want to expand just a little bit, at least what it means to me in the partnership that Nate was talking about. I think the partnership needs to be as local as you can get it. And then it also needs to traverse back up to the state level as well. So it's not just about the community which might host the facility, but making sure that that community has successful conversations with their neighboring community and the state as well. And to me, that partnership is something where we as potential project implementers are on the local team, and that these conversations are conversations that we are supporting, but are led by local leaders. And through that partnership is an extension of that local trust. So I think that's just when we talk about partnership being clear, that it's needed at multiple levels. And it does need, similar to what Rodney said, it does need to have some longevity associated with it. Thanks.
Thank you, Christine. So maybe we could open up to the consortia. You've heard some of these perspectives from some of our invited guests, from academia, from advanced reactor innovation, and from Australia. Is there anything someone from the consortia would like to add to this conversation? We'd be happy to hear your voice. If not, that's okay. Then we can move on to the next question. All right, that's totally fine. There'll be future opportunities. Next up, we have, I believe, John Heaton from the Mayor's Waste Isolation Pilot Plant Task Force. WIPP is, of course, a transuranic deep geologic repository, a deep geologic repository for transuranic nuclear waste, and it's in southeastern New Mexico. So John has many perspectives to share about community engagement as a member of the local community and a close participant with regional government. So John, can you hear us, and are you able to get your audio through here?
Yes, could you hear me okay? Okay.
Loud and clear. Glad to have you here, John.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I've had a vast amount of experience in consent siting with the WIPP project, which took about 25 years to occur. And then we've just completed obtaining a license for a central interim storage facility, which took about 10 years to do. And what I want to remind everybody of is that this is not a short-term process. Engagement has to be considered to be long-term, and it's going to have to bridge many different politicians as this unfolds. And I think this idea of being adaptive is very, very important, because ideas, philosophies, opposition, all of those will change as time goes by. And you have to be prepared to meet those changes. So my recommendations, the two that I am going to put forth, is that number one, the community that is hosting the facility or the immediate region must have very strong and continuing support. If that wanes through the course, you'll be beaten back in a minute. There are just too many different groups and folks that just don't want to have anything nuclear. And the second is that, and from my perspective, which is mostly political about this, is that there are three entities right up front that can stop a project. And those are the governor, the legislature, and the attorney general. So it is very important that through the whole age of the whole process that you're engaged in, you must keep them involved and keep them educated. There will be turnover, and you have to continue to educate. And that is the only real way you're going to end up getting to the end of creating a successful project. Thank you.
Thank you. So that brings us to another question we very frequently get. So consent really isn't meaningful unless it's informed, right? Like you can't consent to something unless you're well informed or well educated, as John Heaton just mentioned about the issue. So I'm wondering if anyone from the consortia or anyone from the online space would be up for talking a bit about how prospective host communities can be informed about siting a different type of, any type of facility, really. How do you create space for them to ask questions? How do you create avenues for them to receive information? How do you open the door for people to walk in and provide input into the siting process that can later be integrated? Has anyone seen sort of case studies or examples related to ways to productively get that two-way street going between educating, making sure folks are informed, but also taking in perspectives from the communities and letting those really steer and shape how you move forward when you're working to site something? And we have Mayor Casper from Idaho Falls on the line today, and she will share some perspectives. Mayor Casper, are you there?
I am.
Thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Very good. I have recently had the opportunity to travel to the municipality of Borselen in the Netherlands. And there I was treated to a tour of some of the sites they have there. They do both high level and low level storage there. They also have a nuclear power plant, all in a very small concentrated area. And there's been a proposal to build, I think, a couple of small modular reactors there. And surprisingly, a community that already hosts some, important nuclear sites had some concerns about this. And they engaged in a very interesting process where they brought in through application or allowed citizens to apply to a study group. And they chose 100 citizens. And they then put them through a series of meetings and gave them a chance to ask their questions, gave them a chance to identify what their concerns were, what their priorities were. And as a result of this, they produced a document known as the Borselen Conditions. They were the Borselen Conditions Group, and then they produced a document. And I believe that they had 41 conditions. And these are being presented to the national government, which will ultimately make the decision about the siting of these small modular reactors. And their concerns, I think, ranged everywhere from worries about traffic and congestion and too many people coming and how many people are going to move in and what kind of housing will be needed, all the way to more scientific type concerns. But I think one of the lessons, there are several lessons we can learn from this experience. And one of them is that there aren't always technical and scientific objections. Sometimes the objections are more along the lines of quality of life in the community and how that will be impacted. And those are things that are not difficult to achieve consensus on or to resolve once they're expressed and aired and cataloged and noted. And so when we think about being informed, we don't always have to be thinking that somehow we have to magically make every citizen a scientific expert. We just have to make sure that we're listening well enough, has been said already, that we can understand the broad nature of concerns that may be arising. But the second thing I want to say is that, I believe that the consortia has already identified this, and it's been said in writing, that we want to have a science-based process. And that's tricky business because if we want to be respectful as well. And when you respect everyone's opinion, and then you have opinions that come forward that are not science-based, perhaps fear-based or perhaps rumor-based types of opinions, it becomes difficult to know how do you dignify that while you're also needing to say, that's not a real scientific concern in this conversation that we're supposed to be having. And so I'd love to hear what others have to say about that particular conundrum, but I do think that keeping it science-based is important. But I have one other lesson we can learn from Borsela, is that those citizens in that group were informed, their processes and meetings were informed by local experts. So it wasn't all just, in our case, maybe DOE scientists coming from out of state or out of the region. They had local folks. And so local expertise is probably something we've not thought about too much, but it might be really important here. So thanks.
Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to weigh in on that question? How about Kara Colton from Energy Communities Alliance, which is a very valuable member of our consent-based siting consortia with a fantastic subgrant opportunity that just came out. So Kara?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what John and Mayor Casper both said, and that is, who is your messenger? Who is the one that's delivering the information? Where are you delivering the information? And so one thing we talk about a lot at ECA is that you have to view the community that you are working with as a partner in the development of a project, not as someone that we need to send armies in to inform, but find your local champions, your trusted champions, and the way that those local communities communicate will be not the same from one community to the other.
Right. So how about Nate Smith? Let's hear from him again. Maybe this plays out differently in the United States versus Australia and other international contexts. Nate, what would you like to add to this from your experience with TELUS and low-level waste?
I grew up near Charlotte, so I know a little bit about the states in here. But I think something Rebecca said, I think really resonates. Where when we've been doing the engagement, you're right. Every community is different, but I think to us, and I think this is the biggest challenge government has. Right, we're a private company, is that consent-based siting. And we ran a consent-based siting process, and we have our own criteria. But consent does not mean 100% consensus. Consent does not mean 100% consensus. And that's really, really challenging, because right now, when you look at, the question of consent-based siting, well, what is consent? And I think that's a real challenge, because this is an emotive topic. The fact of the matter is that we have the technology to isolate almost anything in a range of geologies. There's a lot of safe places to site these facilities. But, Rebecca, as you stated, it's a real challenge, because you're going to be dealing with emotions. I think you can value people, but at the same time have a clear, clear set of statements about, well, I respect your opinion, but kindly, that's not true. And I think that's really what you have to do. And then I think to the core question again about how do you get people to communicate, a lot of free coffee and donuts, bring people out. So
Okay, there you go. All right, thank you very much, Nate. So this actually brings to a larger question of, in communities you've worked with, there's usually some trusted voices or local figures that people kind of turn to. Local citizens trust them. And it becomes a imperative to listen to them very carefully and extend empathy, see their perspectives on their community as a form of expertise in and of itself to inform the process. Try to find the ways to earn the trust to partner with them, and then collaboratively work towards goals in the future. So just throwing a question out there, who are, in your experiences, this could be from the consortia, this could be from the invited panelists online, who are some of these locally trusted figures? Who do they tend to be? And if you don't want to name any sort of specific role they might have in a community, what are some good ways of reaching out and learning lessons from regionally trusted figures? So let's hear from Julia Bovey. She's the director of offshore wind at Eversource Energy and will be really valuable for pulling this conversation into domains outside nuclear and nuclear waste and spent nuclear fuel. Julia, are you on the line?
Yeah, thanks for calling on me. I think citing offshore wind, it's a citing major infrastructure onshore and offshore as well. But I think that it's really similar whether you're building a bridge or a highway or potentially storing low-level nuclear waste. And there, certainly are times where you'll go into a community totally cold and figuring out who the leaders are. I've certainly seen folks go in and hire a lobbyist and then get aligned with completely the wrong people that you don't want to be aligned with. So I found that some sort of less traditional methods have worked, and sometimes it's attending places of worship and speaking with religious leaders in the community at churches, synagogues, mosques, and finding out from those religious leaders who, what are the groups in a community. Often I meet with labor unions, and the labor unions are sometimes leaders in communities, other parts of the country, obviously not so much. But I think now we also have social media as a tool to use, and oftentimes it's easy to see what groups sort of coalesce in a community around social media. I know there are lots of folks who work on siting who are a little scared of social media because it's hard to control, but it is an incredibly important way that people get information and share information. So in my opinion, it's better to really try to own that and get your information, the correct information out as much as possible, because otherwise a void can develop for misinformation sometimes. But I also think once you've figured out exactly who the leaders are in a community, it's usually time to keep working because it can change. And I've certainly seen that in a number of communities lately. And that's, as we all know, it takes many, many years to site these projects. And one group that has power in a community, it can certainly flip. So knowing that there are folks on two sides of many issues, but getting your project to be one of the things that crosses those issues, while difficult, I think is absolutely key to enduring through a long siting process. Thank
you, Julia. Now let's see how that squares with the world of advanced reactor innovation. We have Christine King from GAIN on the line. Christine, would you like to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I think one of the things I have found interesting is that it is the economic development teams in communities that actually have, I would say, the thread that runs through the entire community. And the one thing that I've learned in the discussions that we have been having about communities that are interested in advanced reactors is also the aspect of, focusing on how it benefits the citizens of the community. And one of the things I try to do is to make sure that everyone has the information they need to participate in the conversation with confidence. right? We want everybody to participate in the conversation with confidence. This technology does not have to be overly complicated. The other aspect of it is recognizing that no is just as good an answer as yes. And, making sure that our conversations and our meetings open up the opportunity for getting to know just as fast as you might want to get to yes. But I have found, especially in rural communities, the economic development teams and kind of technology agnostic groups like USDA and EDA have significant relationships and can help make sure that there's a broad discussion across that community.
Right. Thanks, Christine. Very valuable input, and we'll think about this very much moving forward. I think I saw Christine. Did I see Cynthia Windland's hand up? She's the Director of Community Revitalization at the Nuclear Decommissioning Collaborative. Cindy, it's great to have you on the call. You have so much experience in the space related to siting. We'd love to hear your perspective on this as well. I think you might be muted. Are you muted?
I am.
All
All right,
there we go. Now we have audio and video.
I just wanted to back up just.
Welcome to the webinar, Cindy.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to back up a little bit and talk about, I agree, Christine, that all other things that have been talked about with the trusted voices, one of the things that I found to be really helpful, both nuclear and otherwise, with other kinds of siting, and some of my experience has been with things like prisons that have a different kind of emotion attached to them, but is to look back at the history of what other kinds of decisions have been made and who's been involved with those. And this might go a little bit to the success question, but first off, who is involved with providing the basic human needs in the community, the sewer, the water, the food, the housing, the things that people need and trust. So some of those are elected. Some of those might be funding things like the USDA, as you mentioned, but local decision makers with track records, which don't necessarily have to be elected people. But another good point that was made is that these may change over time. So understanding the culture, understanding the history, and then interviewing these people, figure out what is in it for them, or what was in it for them, or what was their impression of the decision-making process, because that's just as important as their name or anything else, is what kind of benefits are we going to get with associating with this trusted partner, and what kind of pitfalls will there be? So I think that I would go back to doing some more groundwork to learn that.
Thank you. That was very valuable. And is there anyone from the room that would like to weigh in on that issue from the consortia room? Yes, right there. From the Holtec Consortium.
Good afternoon, Joyce McMahon from Holtec Consortium. Just speaking from a lot of history and citing a lot of different projects, including energy facility projects, I'm going to touch on two things. One is all politics is local, and that goes to former Representative Tip O'Neill. And looking at those who are most affected by the project are most likely to be the most vocal. So that's why it is important to get to that other, sorry, I forget his name, the guy from Australia who said, it's not consensus, it's consensus, but not all, 100% consent. And you'll find that in every community, there are going to be different leaders who people trust. And so the faith base, as somebody mentioned, is important. Sometimes it's political leaders, sometimes it's not them, sometimes it's a small neighborhood groups. So it's really engaging with your community and not looking at it as everything is specific, but everything is very different in every community. So I don't think there's a silver bullet answer to this, but be very specific to your community, and don't try to take something that fits somewhere else and try to make it fit with yours, because it might not be the case.
All right. Thank you. We also have Brian Ross from the Great Plains Institute. It'd be fascinating to hear from your experiences, Brian, especially with renewable energy, because perhaps there's a different landscape around these issues associated with that. Brian.
Thank you. And I'm going to try and not repeat things that people have already said. I think there are certainly some differences between doing the renewable energy and where we complain about not having social license relative to something like low-level or nuclear waste, where there is definitely not social license. But one of the things I think that needs to be said is to make sure that when you're doing community engagement, to go to where people are already meeting. We've talked about kind of identifying who those are, but it's if you really want to get to get to people's opinions and make them feel comfortable, you don't start by convening a public meeting. Start by going to where they're already going. I think that was implied in some earlier comments, but I just wanted to make sure that it was said openly. And second is that if you really know what communities want, sometimes the first thing people want to do is go to them and ask them what they want. When in fact, what you should probably do is to see whether or not they've already said what they want. I'm an urban planner by training, and I do things like comprehensive plans. A lot of communities will have already identified kind of priorities and important things to them as a community in public processes and things that have already gone on. And they almost certainly have not identified that relative to the particular land use you're talking about. I mean, we find this all the time with renewable energy. The community has not said how they want to integrate wind or solar into their community, but they have identified that agriculture is a high priority, or that economic development is a high priority, or that natural resources are a high priority. And so those already adopted documents is kind of doing your due diligence. I provide the anecdote of when I go to the doctor's office and the doctor comes in and starts asking me things that I told the other doctor at the previous visit, and he obviously hasn't even read my chart. I don't have much respect for him at that point. And we have to make sure that when we're going in and doing siting, that we've done the due diligence that we need to do before we even step foot into the community. And then finally, just a process that is when we talk about consent-based siting, to what end do you need the consent? When we deal with this with renewable energy, sometimes we go into a community and we actually need the local zoning board to provide us with a vote that says yes. And sometimes all we want to do, it turns out that the community doesn't actually have the jurisdictional authority over the site, that somebody else does, for instance, the state agency. And what we're trying to do is just build some level of support at the community level so that it doesn't rise up in the jurisdictional authority of somebody else. So kind of really understanding what is it you're trying to get the decision makers in the community to do, and then making sure that you're providing the decision makers with the tools to address the community. Don't always think that you have to address the community's objections or concerns. Make sure you're providing the tools to the decision makers so that they can do that. That's something that I think is also missed in many siting processes.
Thank you so much, Brian. Yeah, I just want to flag that, especially what you said about consent. That's something we discuss very frequently. Consent is not a one-size-fits-all concept. It can vary widely from community to community. Within communities, there can be a sort of wide diversity of perspectives on what consent means, how it's framed, who the ultimate decision makers are, when it is arrived at, what informed consent means, et cetera. And that's something we're working with closely with the consortia now. We've wrapped it into the process document as well to work with communities, realizing that, you know, when it does come time to do a national call for potential host communities to volunteer, we have to be very careful to figure out what regional definitions of consent are and what makes sense, and sort of co-design and co-develop that with folks. So thank you for flagging that. If I could ask you one quick follow-up question. I don't know if you're still on the line. You said something that really spoke to me. And then it's the question is, you mentioned going This is for Brian Ross. You mentioned going to places where people are. We've heard faith-based organizations as one example. Could you give examples of meeting people where they are? Like, what are some of the types of places in a community that people might congregate to that one could reach out and then have these discussions rather than inviting people into domains that we're comfortable with in, say, the Department of Energy? Brian, you follow up on that? I think that's really with our previous discussions.
Sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, faith-based kind of organizations is kind of the first place that many of us go when we talk about this. But there are, and I think somebody mentioned neighborhood organizations. There are convenings in some communities around those kinds of things. You have to do a little bit of research and find out where people go to. And sometimes there are, we've done some community engagement where we went out to the county fair because everybody goes to the county fair, or to a particular gathering place in the community that may be more informal. Yeah, and you have to be a little bit. I mean, you can't walk into the local coffee shop or the convenience store where people happen to gather and start going up and poking people and asking what they're due. But you can go to those places in order to publicize other things that are going on, or just for opinions on things like community bulletin boards and things like that. So I think that there's a little bit of research you probably have to do at community by community, but there are always places that people go. I mean, one of the places that in urban neighborhoods, when we do outreach and things like shops or even nail salons are places that people go to meet and talk, and they may provide opportunities, to do some very small scale kind of engagement to really get a pulse.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's incredibly productive line of thinking. I'm actually thinking I went to a county fair. That's an interesting one a few months ago in Humboldt County, California. And I noticed that the Geological Survey had an earthquake simulator there. So you would go in, and then we were right near the Mendocino Triple Junction, which is a very seismically active area. There's concerns about Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, et cetera. So they want to educate the public and make people aware of what it's like to be in an earthquake. So they go into a simulated room and it shakes you to let you know what it feels like to be in a sort of a 7-level earthquake. So I always thought county fair was on my list of interesting places to engage and bring things to the public. And if people see it and want to walk by and don't care, that's fine. But if they see it and say, hey, that's interesting, they walk over and now you can start a conversation. So we have Mark Bollinger on the line as well. Mark's from the Department of Energy himself, but he is not based at HQ like many of us are. He is based in a field office right near the waste isolation pilot plant, which is a transuranic waste deep geologic repository in salt, as I previously mentioned. Mark, are you on the line? Can we hear you?
I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you loud and clear. Mark, what perspectives do you have to share on these issues?
Yeah, well, it's very unique when you're a lead federal official at an operating, nuclear facility in the field to understand and to learn about and become aware of the real partnership you have with your local community. And for many of us in my position, it can be a huge change. And so for me, it has been extremely educational to learn the history of WIPP. We're celebrating 25 years of waste emplacement in a geological repository, where the rest of the world is really just trying to begin those sorts of things. So I continue to offer WIPP again as a learning platform. It is a pilot plant. We continue to learn today after 25 years. And so as I recall and think about some of the things Brian said about going to the community, I think of the stories of famous educators in our area that really made a difference. And one of those was a man named Dr. Wendell Wirtz, who came to us from Sandia and had spent decades in the business as a geophysicist and became just a fantastic educator in our area, doing exactly what Brian said, going from community meeting to community meeting, and answering every single question, bad or good, and just being a wonderful rock to the core of our support that allowed WIPP to get open and get started. And the other element to that core, as John said, needs to stay there and needs to have that durability to get through the ups and downs. And our rock was John Heaton for many years. And he made this facility happen through sheer will and going to Washington on a biweekly basis with the community leaders and not just saying, it's okay if you put your facility here. He was demanding that the facility be there for the benefit of the community and because they had been educated and they understood the science said it was the right place to do this for America. And so I thank John Heaton every time I have the opportunity. I work with John daily as a partner still to this day after his involvement for some 40 years in order to say that sort of long-term commitment by the local community was critical to get us to where we are. And I encourage you to still keep learning lessons from WIPP today.
Thank you so much. And it's great to hear from you. It's great to hear from John as well. And glad to hear he was so vital and essential to your process, especially in our discussion of regionally trusted figures and brokering relationships based on mutual trust, mutual respect, and collaborative vision. So thank you so much, Mark, for joining and discussing this. I'd like to open this up to the consortia a little bit too, if there's any insight that would like to be shared. How about the one in the back there?
I am Matthew Weber from Rutgers University. I'm part of the Vanderbilt Consortia. I just wanted to come back to the comment that Brian made about the county fair. First, I thought that was a great point about ways that you can learn about community perspective and points of view, but I would say you can almost back the microscope up a level from that and engage in a process of social listening, which is something that we're approaching utilizing with the Vanderbilt work. We're looking at existing community news coverage. We're looking at prior hearings that have occurred at the local and state levels. And then we're using social media as well. And utilizing computational approaches, we're looking at what are the core issues that are previously being discussed in those different forums. And that's helped us to identify core concerns in different communities, as well as to understand community perspectives about those concerns. So for instance, are there environmental issues that are being raised, and are those being raised in a positive light or a negative light? We're pretty quickly able to identify those initial concerns using those types of data.
Thank you. Julia Bovey, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. Well, of course, it sounds like it would be incredibly useful to use data of what's been brought up previously. I think what I found a lot over the years of citing projects is that the voices that have sort of run the show in a lot of communities previously were ones that really left women and people of color out of the conversation. And that often it was the property owners of the most expensive property in a place that got their way. So it feels like now that we're doing this work through a justice lens and a collaborative lens, that it can be really exciting to start fresh and really go into a community and listen to people who haven't been heard before. And often they end up being the best allies. The Chamber of Commerce is always used to getting its way, but there are others who haven't been consulted, and getting the kind of respect and consideration that they've deserved all along can be very powerful, I think.
Thanks, and I'd agree that so essential to the consent-based siting process is the integration of environmental justice principles, principles of equity. We have an environmental justice lead on our team. We have a robust social science program across several national laboratories that looks at issues of equity and environmental justice to make sure that we're pushing forward our consent-based siting program in ways that align with the needs of people in communities of all kinds. So I'd like to kind of open it up and ask that question a little more to whoever would like to weigh in. How can we best integrate environmental justice principles moving forward when working to site a facility such as a federal consolidated interim storage facility? And how can we best empower historically marginalized communities in the siting process as we pursue this? And happy to entertain a question from the consortia, from our online guests. It's sort of an open floor for this. How about Cindy Winland?
Hi, thanks. I think I have my video and audio on. I just wanted to add a little bit about engaging people. You know, one of the things, as well as the environmental justice aspect, but one of the tools that I've used in the past, I'm also a planner, is something called meetings in a box. And you can offer a set of tools to people to hold a meeting on their own, in their own home or wherever they'd like, with the people that they choose. And so from the point of environmental justice, offer this in places where people might not have been heard, like those most impacted, those most physically close to a potential facility or an existing facility. People who are self-identified as having been wronged in the past. But what you're doing then is giving them a safe place, as well as letting them choose the people that they think need to be heard. And rather than us going in and saying, I think that, you know, we're going to go to the library or we're going to go somewhere else.
Thank you. And let's hear from Rebecca Casper. Mayor Casper has her hand up. We'd love to hear from you on this important issue.
I don't have anything profound to say here other than to just point out that the emphasis on environmental justice is one that makes a lot of sense when you start having the conversation. But when the term first came out, it was kind of a brand new term that felt like it was a top-down, hey, Washington, D.C. wants local governments to start thinking about environmental justice. And to be perfectly honest, I try to be a smart girl. I try to be informed, but as a local leader, I am sometimes too tied up in, you know, a zoning issue or police and fire concerns, or, you know, things that are going on in my community, to suddenly then have somebody put environmental justice on my shoulders. I'm thinking, I don't even know what DC means by that. And multiple times I've asked, and I've never really seen a useful definition. And it's because probably there is no one definition, but there might be some value in creating some documentation that gives examples of, just like our Ms. Bovey just did, talking about, hey, let's incorporate women or you know, minority groups into dialogues, have those kinds of meetings, or have that kind of outreach. Those kinds of tips and tricks and examples would be a really useful thing, I think, for some community leaders who are encountering this concept and not really knowing what Washington, D.C. and headquarters mean by that. So just a thought. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, we will definitely digest that and think about that as well. We have the Office of Nuclear Energy has at the Department of Energy has a community of practice around environmental justice, and I think it could be a really great topic to bring up during that your comment, Mayor Casper. So thank you. Let's hear from Olson from RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute.
Yeah, thanks. Jim Olson, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. We're fortunate that we have a consultant on our team from the state of Texas, and she brought to our attention that state has been doing a lot of work for these types of justice issues, and we're hoping to connect with them in the future. She's actually also here with us today, so I'm going to pass the mic to her so she can share a little bit more.
I didn't know you were going to do that. Laretha Clay, RPI consultant, and I'm not sure.
Rebecca Dorse, Texas.
Oh, so the state of Texas does have an initiative through its Department of Transportation that is working with communities, specifically Freedom Colony communities, which I'm not sure everyone knows what those are, but those are communities founded by emancipated Texans. Well, they can be anywhere. Emancipated people right after between 1867 and the early 20th century. And just putting together toolkits to help have a guideway for people to discuss road projects that are coming up online or that they are thinking about for future terms, whatever, so that the community can be more involved in making those decisions and figuring out how to make those projects not be as negatively impactful on the communities that they're coming through.
Thank you so much. And we'd also like to hear from, there's one question from here from Lisa Marshall from the NC State Consortium.
Hi, I'm going
One response.
to put on my geography hat for a minute. When I think of environmental justice, I think about the context in which we are or we've gotten to this particular point. And it means then taking a moment to pause and look at why gentrification happens in certain communities, why your landfills are located in other communities, right? And an understanding of that then helps us to move forward with that community if we're going to engage them in a conversation about consent-based siting, right? And I think that a number of us have said it, that it's a listening first. But even before that, there's a relationship building that needs to happen. And it has to be authentic, which means that we have to be in that community, not because we have something that we want to talk about, but we're there because we want to listen and then use our power, because we all walk with some level of power, to raise the volume on the issue at hand.
Thank you so much. And how about John Heaton is still on the line. John, Mark Bollinger referred to you as the rock behind the WIPP siting effort. So it'd be great to hear from you on this issue. Would you like to share some comments on some of the questions that have come up?
First of all, environmental and the environmental justice issue, I think that today you would not have a site that was not remote and isolated. I don't think any site that was adjacent to a community, whether they were minority, not minority, whoever it is not going to pass muster today with any licensing organization. So it's going to need to be remote and distant from population areas. I guess that's term means the same. But what is interesting about environmental justice, and I agree with Rebecca Casper and Mayor Casper, and what he's saying is that now we're finding that groups that are 400 or 500 miles away think they have a say-so about some of the environmental issues. Now, I would concur that they have something to say about transportation, but you find large groups in the United States that are much more formal today than they were when, as an example, we were getting WIPP permitted and or even the Holtec project. We saw that there were groups all over the country that were raising objections, and I can understand they were objecting to the transportation issues, but didn't have a clue about what they were. Groups like the Sierra Club just have a national opposition to anything nuclear. So these are major concerns that I have and that many other people have about how far-reaching environmental justice really is, because the environment of the project itself is not impacting them whatsoever. It's just the transportation issues that are coming into their venues that make them want to oppose it. So it's important for people to understand that they need to understand all the transportation issues about, especially a nuclear project, and how protective the NRC is about the casks and delivery systems, and what they've done to eliminate mistakes of man. They've engineered those mistakes out of those transportation issues so that there are no releases. And I think that or the release risk factor is 1 billion to 1, which is like it does not exist. So those are things that today you have to contend with, and it takes a broad effort in the United States with DOE, the labs, the universities, people that are informed to make sure that these groups understand the science. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'd like to flag that the diversity of perspectives in this room is really phenomenal. There's so many different perspectives. Some of these conversations are very difficult. They're hard to have. People see it from remarkably different perspectives. And I think that that's what's so important about this first stage planning and capacity building in the consent-based siting process, is that we can have these conversations. A term like environmental justice brings up so many different imageries and associations for people. Consent-based siting and the associated environmental justice, what we define as environmental justice in our social science programs, we know it entails extra work and there's lots of responsibilities and challenges associated it, but we think it's not only the right thing to do, but also the best chance for success moving forward. And we've seen that from international examples as well. So I'd like to thank everyone for weighing in on these fantastic in fantastically different series of ways about these questions. And maybe Kara Colton from Energy Communities Alliance could weigh in on this and see where she can take the conversation. She's actively engaged as a consortium maker.
I just have a quick question for
Yeah.
John, that for me, it's interesting that we're talking about consent versus trying to change it to be, why would somebody want to volunteer? Whereas the conversation about the value add or the business case for something. And so I wanted to ask John Heaton, before WIPP was cited, did the area around Carlsbad and Hobbs and Eddy Lee, was there a move to volunteer? Was there a level of interest that pre-existed anybody else coming down to southeastern New Mexico and saying, hey, you guys have great geology, we love your salt?
Well, to briefly answer that, to give you a little bit of history, the first, or the National Academies of Sciences in 1957 were recommending salt as the best repository medium for nuclear materials. And so Lyons, Kansas was a designated site, and they rejected it. And some of our people locally, because we do mining basically in salt, understood, and we understand the medium. And they said, let's investigate this. So that group of leaders in the community, which were our legislative leaders, our county commissioners, our city council members, the idea to begin with was, let's keep our minds open. Let's be open-minded about this and learn about it before we say no or before we say yes. And that is what happened. They were able to convince the community to not take a position until they learned about it. Who really knows a lot about nuclear materials? Very few people, really. And so that is what Mark brought up, and I appreciated his comments about me very much. I feel the same about him. He's a tremendous leader. But what happened then is that Sandia National Labs was our technical scientific advisor. And so we had meetings on a monthly basis where it was a breakfast meeting open to anyone in the community, and they could come listen to Wendell give a progress report and also answer any questions that anybody had. And if you know Wendell, he's not an overbearing person. He's very approachable. So those were very good meetings that people were able to ask questions. And at the same time, we had groups going to every civic organization in town, of which there must have been 15, and going to the Chamber of Commerce, going to the Department of Development, other agencies in the communities, giving briefings before the city council, the county commissions. And at the same time, our legislators were very active in Santa Fe. but it was those meetings where people grew to understand what nuclear materials were. And as you know, in the beginning, we were going to be a high-level waste repository, which was then changed in 1987 when Yucca Mountain was designated as the high-level waste repository, and we were designated as the transuranic repository. Unfortunately, that might have been a mistake by the politicians, because probably today we would have a high-level waste repository in Salt and the 16 square miles that we have at the WIPP site, a huge, huge area that could accommodate everything in the country. But that's how we got started, Kara. And it took a lot of effort. It was a 25-year effort from beginning to, or a little longer than that actually, to getting the permits we needed and the to open in 1999. So we had begun working on this in the
Thank you,
mid-70s.
John. Hey, that's thank you for your very detailed sort of exhaustive explanation. We're going pretty far into the weeds here. We're in the nuclear space right now. We've taken a deep dive into WIPP. Let's broaden it a little more. Let's hear from, thank you so much, John. Let's hear from Julia Bovey, who works with offshore wind at Eversource Energy. Julia, so you're watching these conversations unfold. What insights would you like to share about this?
Hearing John's experience, I mean, certainly brought up a lot for me in terms of, you know, when I'm meeting with folks in communities talking about big infrastructure that's going to be built. I mean, obviously they're not experts, they don't understand it, but they have real reasons to be opposed to having nuclear materials. And I just don't think saying to somebody, it's 1 in a billion chance is the way that we're ever going to get to consensus siting. And that may be true. I'm certainly not a scientific expert, but, you know, meeting people where they are and talking about their concerns, even if they don't seem to be scientifically relevant, I think is a huge part of this conversation. And there are people, we all know, like, they don't want this kind of storage because they don't want nuclear energy. And if you find out something to do with the storage, then you're going to build more nukes. Sometimes it's as simple as that. It's not about what you're actually trying to do here. But I do worry that sometimes when we get into the, you know, it's only 1 in a billion, that unfortunately that's when we can lose people in consensus siting.
Thank you so much. And, you know, this has been such an enriching and engaging conversation. There's been no shortage of participation and people engaging. We've already gone almost 15 minutes over. So we'll make space for maybe one more comment if anyone would like to join in, and then we should probably close this out, even though I feel like this could last several hours at the rate we're going with all the interesting sort of comments that piggyback on other comments that lead to other comments and are going in productive ways and diverging in interesting ways. So how about Nate Smith from TELUS? You got up nice and early, so let's end the way we started by hearing from you.
Look, I really appreciate.
Yeah, I'm glad you're still awake as well.
3 cups of coffee. No. Look, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm actually really passionate about something that Julia and John said, and we took a different approach to consent-based siting. And I think those principles of environmental social justice, but also logic in which communities will accept. And it just give me a moment. I mean, we had a thesis that, frankly, and we were really passionate about this as a team, is that, you know, a lot of the communities that would be willing to accept this wouldn't have the resources, the understanding, or the education to actually know that they were ideal for one of these repositories. But what John said as well, I think, is spot on, that I think, you know, through process of selection in history, we have a pretty good idea of what communities would actually accept this or would be open to accepting this based on, have they experienced mining? Have they had other large infrastructure projects before in the past? Do they have collated governance principles to make decisions? And so what we did is we actually created a we have like 100 something, it's 100, I think it's 102 different site selection criteria that are primarily based around the socioeconomics and the historical data of different communities. And as opposed, we did a reverse inquiry. We basically made a decision that, we don't think a lot of these communities would come out. So we identified, a handful of communities that we thought, based on socioeconomic principles of environmental justice, might be interested in this. And we went back and had those conversations. And as John said, I think that's one of the reasons why we were successful, is we did the research on the communities. We understood them before we went there. And, it's led to two successful siting initiatives. But thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you for joining. All right, so we've reached the end of our time together. Thank you all so much for joining us. This has been a really stimulating dialogue. Please feel free to send any additional perspectives you may have for the consent-based siting program to our email address. The email address again is consent-based-siting@hq.doe.gov. We appreciate your interest in consent-based siting and all the lively conversation that's come along with it, and we look forward to more engagement in the future. So thank you from the U.S. Department of Energy. Take care. Till next time.